Hi, my name is Caiden Sumner, and today I will be sharing an active learning strategy that has helped me grow as a learner since taking this class. As someone with a shorter attention span, this engaging strategy has helped me so much. The strategy I'm talking about is called learning by self-testing. There are many strategies that can help students become active learners, but I hope to show you today why learning by self-testing has helped me the most out of any other strategy. Okay, what is learning by self-testing and how do we apply it? So basically, this strategy is also known as retrieval-based learning. And first, you must assess the information that you're trying to learn and figure out what the main points are that you need to understand, because you can't write questions without fully understanding the background and what you're trying to understand at the end. Second, you must turn the information into a question with a distinct answer, and then make an answer key. Third, take your test and hide your answer key, answering only by memory and understanding of the information. After you take the test, the final step is to grade your answers and determine what concepts you need to practice more. The act of writing the questions and then finding the answers serve as a mental workout and help learners organize their material by reinforcing existing connections between elements of the previous learned information and integrate the material by building new connections between the previously learned information and with the relevant prior knowledge. The act of rereading the information learned and selecting the most difficult parts, then turning them into questions, and then answering them allows for the most personalized learning experience possible. Learning by self-testing is one of the 8 generative learning strategies that we talked about in class. And generative learning strategies facilitate active learning as they require actively making sense of the to-be-learned information by selecting the information, organizing it into a cohesive format in your working memory, and then integrating it to your long-term memory. We know this strategy works because there's been lots of research. For example, Roediger and Karpik, a study in 2006 that we talked about in class in September, proved that students who took practice recall tests after reading a passage remembered much more after a few days or weeks than a student that just reread the passage. This study I have found to be very true because I have used this self-testing strategy in a lot of my classes, but the most recent time that I used it was for my political science class. And I had an exam about 2 weeks ago, so I had to write a whole practice test after going through my notes and highlighting all of the key points. And then I walked away from the test so that I wouldn't just instant recall and remember the answers. And then walked back, took the test, and then graded it, and I did decently well on the first one. And then I went back, looked at the information that I got wrong, and realized there was a lot of common themes to the things that I was getting wrong. So then I made flashcards and took another practice test with new questions that I wrote. And I felt like after that, I fully understood all the information, and I ended up getting an A on the actual exam, and still feel like I hold all of that information in my long-term memory, which will help for the upcoming final. This is a great strategy, but like all of them, there are a few challenges that may be posed. So the first challenge that I had was that I struggled with feeling like I was getting everything wrong because I was selecting the hardest information and writing the hardest questions possible to be tested on. But then as I continued to review, I realized that some of the questions I wrote were just too hard and would never be something that we'd be tested on as freshmen. And then the rest of the information I started to feel much more confident on the more I reviewed and looked at flashcards and wrote more questions. So basically, the more you practice, the more you do self-tests, they get easier. And so my second challenge was that I felt like it was impossible to write my own questions on information that I didn't fully understand. So before you take a self-test, it's really important that you understand the basics of the information that you are trying to test on. And you want to avoid the possibility of further confusing yourself on the subject by writing questions that could be false or misleading. So since I have adopted learning by self-testing as an active learning strategy, I have noticed real-life improvements on my understanding of information, which I feel like the better I understand information, I score better on my tests, And when I'm doing well in school, I feel like I feel more confident in lots of other areas of my life. So basically, I think it all starts with having a solid foundation of a way to active learn. And in my specific scenario, I think that learning by self-testing is my best option. So the second impact that I found from learning by self-testing is that my metacognition has improved. So basically, metacognition is just the awareness and understanding of one's own thought process. It's just thinking about thinking. And in this context, it really has just helped me realize like what specifically I'm preparing for, and being able to look at the way my brain processes the information and the concepts that I struggle the most with makes me a more independent learner. And this metacognition has transferred into many other classes unintentionally, because the more you practice metacognition, the more it starts to slip into every area of life. In conclusion, I've found that learning by self-testing is by far the most impactful generative learning or active learning strategy that I've tested so far. And being able to write my own questions and then answer my own questions to fully bring the information from my sensory to my working to my long-term memory has really proved to help me in all of my classes that I've tried it in, and the results speak for themselves. And so I believe that this and any other active learning strategy that builds your metacognition will help you gain confidence in the real world and in any subject you take. So thank you for listening, and I hope you now understand why learning by self-testing is my favorite study technique.